We are a global community equipped to troubleshoot the technology that runs the world. Join our community, learn, collaborate, and let's become together masters of troubleshooting and monitoring. Welcome you to Netdata Community.
All right, welcome in everybody to season 1 of the Netdata Troubleshooting Show. This is Blake, the Director of Community at Netdata. We're going to bring our panel up today. Just a quick note that we just launched our GitHub discussions. We'll put a link to that into chat. Go over there, throw some ideas, things like that. Very exciting. And without further ado, we are going to be taking off and getting season 1 going. We'll put into the chat. We've got some Netdata swag, some t-shirts, some stickers, some great stuff there as well. So I'll put my email into the chat. You want some cool Netdata swag, let me know. So let me bring up our panel today. We are covering cloud trends on the Netdata Troubleshooting Show. We are season 1. We've got some amazing people today. So let us get going without further ado, and I will bring everybody up onto the stage. How is everybody doing today?
Great.
Doing well, really well. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So up first, Tristan, let us know a little bit about yourself, what you've got going on and working with, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Yeah, thanks for that intro, Blake. Happy to be here. I'm Tristan, a native New Yorker, born and raised. I am a product manager with IBM, working specifically on IBM Cloud. And we're doing some really cool things over there, specifically in the container service, developing tools to help increase productivity for developers and people everywhere. Specifically working with IBM as well as Red Hat in a collaborative effort. So it's really awesome. There's always something to learn. So looking forward to learning from the panel here today as well as contributing.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much for being on here. And then next, a person that had one of the most amazing blog posts last year on cloud trends, the one and only Adrian. Adrian, tell people a little bit about yourself, and we will put a link to chat in the chat on your amazing blog post.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you very much for saying that about my post. My name's Adrian Mouat. I'm chief scientist at a company called Container Solutions. And basically, we help people as a consultancy company, and we help people move to cloud native. But my role is a little bit different. I'm in charge of our open source projects. So we have a few different open source projects, things like external secret operator for getting secrets like from AWS Manager into Kubernetes, and Trial, which is like a container registry, and a few others as well.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Adrian. And we put a link in the chat where you can go check out that post. Let us know what you think. We'll have a great Q&A at the end as well. And up next, he won't be singing Pink Floyd for us, but we've got the one and only, an expert in cloud space that's been around forever, the one and only Ray.
Thanks, Blake. Appreciate that. Forever is a long time, so maybe just shy of forever. But thanks. I'm happy to be here. So my name is Ray Elenteny. I currently working at a company called Solutech, Inc., based out of Atlanta, Georgia, in the U.S. And we do a bunch of solution services, contract hire, that kind of thing. At the same time, I've done quite a bit of consulting for different organizations in terms of bringing their cloud and container strategy to life. I've done that in 4 organizations now. And so I really am passionate about it. And that's why this talk is interesting, not only as a participant, but as an observer of what these great team members are going to share. So I do love the space and look forward to participating today.
Excellent. And then without further ado, person that I always love working with, we just did KubeCon in Los Angeles. They just became a father with a new kid. So really, really those sleepless nights. But you are here, Samir. So tell people a little bit about us and anything you want to share about your kid.
Thanks, Blake, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Samir Behara. I work as a platform architect at EBSCO, based out of Birmingham, Alabama. I build software solutions using cutting-edge cloud-native technologies. I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP with over 16 years of IT experience. Looking forward to this panel discussion. It's a great panel. Happy to be here. And yes, Blake, as you mentioned, yeah, a lot of sleepless nights, but it's been fun. I just had a baby girl named Ashika on February the 4th.
Yeah, it's great. I was kind of like wondering if they'd be named Wasm or eBPF, Kubernetes containers, but we'll save that for like down the road. We'll see what career path they take, right? So thanks for that, Samir. Always love working with you. Wow, we've got some amazing people in this panel. And last but not least, a person that I'm so excited to work with every day at Netdata, our very own Andy. Andy, take it away. For people not familiar with you and what you're doing at Netdata, let them know.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Hey, I'm Andy. I'm in my shed out my back garden in Kildare, just outside Dublin in Ireland. I kind of have two main hats in Netdata. First one kind of helping with our analytics, focusing on how do we become more product led as a company and using data to kind of drive that. So typical sort of data engineering type stuff. And then the second hat is leading our machine learning efforts. So how can we kind of have, bring machine learning as part of the furniture of Netdata? That's the short kind of plan there. Yeah, good to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
All right, so let's get it going. Without further ado, as you have questions, you're watching us from around the world, throw those into chat. We'll take those up on the Q&A. Our first topic today is, so we're a cloud trend show today for 2022, and there's so much stuff that's going on out there and what people are talking about. But if we had to boil that down to just a few things that are pressing, like the pressing trends that companies should really prioritize, right? There's a sea of stuff out there. The cloud ecosystem keeps getting bigger and bigger. But in your mind, that's great, but there's also so much noise. But where should companies prioritize? What are those like trends that are also pressing that companies should take advantage of and think about right now?
I guess I can kick it off. Some trends that I'm seeing and things that I'm seeing in my day-to-day and just in general in the cloud space is security. That's one of the biggest trends that I see people need to prioritize. And I say that, we're going to go a bit more deeper into that later, but I say that because as a result of us moving to this remote world, which makes things like these panels possible, there's a lot of these companies that weren't yet prepared, even though that's where we're eventually going. So there are a lot of companies that are creating certain services and solutions that aren't as hardened as they should be. They don't have the resiliency, and there's a lot of cracks where a lot of cybersecurity things can happen. So that's one of the things that I'm keen to talk about.
I would say one of the things that, from my perspective and what I've seen is, is it planning for a controlled entry. People tend to jump in, which is great, and play with things, and then those things, it's not too different than writing code. You start with a prototype and you end up with that being the production code, right? It's the same thing with what I've seen with the adoption in the cloud and moving to it. And it's Tristan's point, I mean, security is huge, and it cannot be an afterthought, right? And so these are the things that I've seen is, how is it going? How are you going to evolve there? How are you going to control your growth? How is your current pipelines going to adapt to moving to the cloud? And is it all container based, or is it a mix of different things? And what is the strategy? And it's not just I'm moving these VMs from here to here, taking the time to think it through and gradually work your way there is the thing that I've seen that folks really need to spend the time to do up front.
I completely agree with the statements made here. Well, in the last 2 years, at least since COVID, I've seen there has been a lot of investment in technology, and companies are like rapidly adopting public cloud. A lot of on-prem workloads are being migrated to the cloud as well. People are starting to evaluate multi-cloud options as well, right? There's a lot of focus around infrastructure as code. There is an increase in the adoption of like cloud agnostic tooling like Terraform, I would say. Another trend which Blake we saw in KubeCon last year was the growing popularity of GitOps pattern. Like a large number of organizations, they are kind of leveraging the GitOps workflow as an operating model to manage the continuous deployment of their production applications which are running in Kubernetes. So yeah, there's just so much going on at this point.
Yeah, from my end, I definitely, second to the points in GitOps and security. I think with security, I'm going to talk about it later, but like supply chain security in particular has become huge, especially after the SolarWinds incident and the presidential, what was it, decree? Yeah, so that's going to be enormous. Other things, serverless or in the sense of like functions as a service and so on, is becoming bigger and bigger. I think we're going to talk about WebAssembly a bit. That again is going to become bigger and bigger and actually ties in to like some of these other issues as well. And I think we might talk about AI as well. I think sort of the GPT-3 stuff and the sort of GitHub code helpers and things like that. Those things I think will play a big part of our future in the next sort of within the next 5 to 10 years anyway.
One thing that I tend to have a data focus, so I'm most focused on kind of consuming the data that comes out of all these technology platforms, and one thing we notice as well is just that the complexity of the data ecosystem is just grows and grows. Some data lives in S3 and AWS, some lives in BigQuery, and there's nothing you can do about it because that's all you get from the webhooks from the third parties that you use. And how do you kind of make sense of all this and kind of make it all work together? And I think some of the big cloud providers are starting to do a little bit more where they're going to have more integrations and they're not going to necessarily compete on that stuff and play a bit nicer together. But it's still a really, really kind of, there's a lot of complexity that comes out the back end when you're trying to actually use the data to make decisions or to power these, ML, AI type tools. And so that's something we're kind of struggling with at the moment, is actually the data complexity on the back end of it all.
That's a great point, Andy. And it's not just the complexity, it's the amount, right? The size, how much data there is. That's become a very big challenge for a lot of folks as well.
Yeah, for sure. And like the cloud costs on the back end of that as well. So, I mean, sometimes our data pipelines are kind of under-engineered and to be as simple as possible. But the flip side of that is we sometimes reprocess the data too many times, and sometimes that you end up with higher cloud costs, and it can get scary quick enough if you don't keep your eye on it as well.
Awesome, that's great. And is there anything around like monitoring or troubleshooting you see as like a trend? So that's like one of the big things, I know we'll talk about security, but like how do you keep the companies out of the front page or like trending on social in the wrong way?
I think one of...
Oh, go ahead, sir.
Sorry. I think one of the things that we've seen in terms of that, especially in this remote world, is that when everything spun off, the IT departments really didn't have the facilities as well that they needed. So when thinking of creating this secure cloud environment, we also have to include IT solutions as well. So that's a larger growth in like shadow IT devices and things of that nature. So I think that'll help a lot with troubleshooting any issues that may or may not come.
I would agree with that. And the one of the challenges there too is fine-grained access to it, because in some cases the ops folks need something, sometimes the developers need something, and it's all coming from the same place often, and being able to provide some kind of fine-grained control so everybody can do their job and contribute to the work that's going on. And, we've probably all been through this before, but it's the right monitoring, and it's the right logging. For those have been in the Java world for a long time, 5,000 Java, stack exceptions in a log file is not very helpful. And so you need some meaning to that message. And in some cases, it's a matter of sifting it, like Andy said, you need to sift it, but at the same time, being deliberate in terms of what you're monitoring, why you're doing it, and the information that you're providing.
Yeah, I would agree there. Like, again, having access to the right monitoring observability tools is as well a key, right? And you don't want to have a lot of noise around alerts with so much of data capture which you're having. You need to have actionable alerts as well in place. One more thing is when it comes to observability monitoring, you don't want all your development teams in a enterprise discovering their own tooling, and these tooling needs to be provided as a platform maybe, so that it would be standardized across your organization.
All right. Yeah, that's usually like on my side is like people just say, hey, there's a lot of cloud trends. The only thing I care about, I don't want to go viral on Twitter. And that's my only OKR for the year, right? Up next, me and Samir were at KubeCon. They do these like amazing, like 1 day like event shows, WebAssembly. Like, wow, like the people coming out of that for like Wasm and was just like through the roof. I don't know, Samir, if you're like at that particular one, but like the energy and excitement for WebAssembly, it was just like, it felt like people were just coming up and grabbing me. It's like, you got to go to the next one. So I was like, wow. And so when we were putting this panel together, a lot of people are referring us back to the blog post that Adrian wrote. So while we have you here, Adrian, with the panel, let's talk about like WebAssembly. What's going on there? Everybody is like so fired up and excited about it. I don't work with it, so tell me like what's exciting about it and what's practical.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I can't claim to be an absolute expert on it. I have a good overview, perhaps. It maybe, I guess, it's worth like starting with a bit of an explanation of kind of what it is. So one of the standard joke is WebAssembly is neither web nor assembly. So the reason, I'll start with assembly. The reason it's not technically not assembly is it doesn't actually target like a specific architecture. So you think about assembly, you've got x86, which is obviously tied to a particular instruction set, basically, or hardware architecture. Whereas WebAssembly is actually like a bytecode, so very much like a sort of simplified form of Java bytecode, if you like. And that's the way to think about it in terms of code. Regarding the web, it's actually gone past the web, right? So it does have its origins in things like ASM.js, where we were just basically trying to make things run faster on the web. But it's gone beyond that. And now it's also very important for things like Internet of Things, functions as a service. So we have people like Cloudflare and Fastly are running like serverless architectures, functions as services platforms on top of WebAssembly. Is a really good example the other day was Amazon Prime uses WebAssembly in their sort of video players that run on your TVs or wherever, and that's a really good use case for WebAssembly because WebAssembly is efficient, but it's also agnostic as to like the underlying hardware and so on. And another great thing is that it got a very good security model, so people have thought about how it interfaces with the rest of the system, so you can really sort of lock things down and say a lot of things there. Yeah, and just to finish on that point, I think that the way I tend to think about it, and this works perhaps for like the older people amongst us, but a lot of us can probably remember the promise of like Java, and we always talked about write once, run anywhere. And it never really panned out because of various issues, I think at the start with efficiency and differences between implementations. But that's very much the same idea with WebAssembly, or in my opinion, it is. So that was a fire hose. Does that make sense?
You know, Adrian, thanks for that. What I see over the years, and I've primarily worked in the software development arena, but I've just latched onto containers because it's about deploying applications, right? Everything's about deploying applications. We don't write code just to watch it run on our machines. Well, maybe sometimes we do, but but in the business world, we're trying to deploy applications. So it's interesting you bring up the Java point. And I read your blog as well because I talk about this in terms of the industry striving for the next best way to deploy applications. And I actually start with back in the day, I worked at a company. We were writing Unix and C++ platform, 12 platforms, and all the stuff that there. Then Java came around, and Java was to us a bit of a lifesaver in terms of now we can single source, right? So now we could abstract the runtime, and then VMs came along. You could abstract the machines, and then containers came along, and now you can abstract the runtime, and now orchestration comes along. So I see this evolution, and WebAssembly to me looks like feels like the next step in this evolution towards this, write once, run anywhere. And there'll be another one that follows, but the industry just keep pushing this way, and I think it's an evolution that's been going on for 25 years, and it's all good. And I think this is a very interesting part of that evolution right now.
Yeah, and on that point, I think one interesting project is Crustlet. So there's a project that lets you run on your Kubernetes cluster. You can run WebAssembly like it was a container, and that's a really interesting evolution as well. One thing I didn't touch on was also like the multiple languages that you can use to target WebAssembly. So you don't generally write WebAssembly by hand. You can do, and there's like a fantastic blog I think I linked to, or a GitHub site that I linked to. This guy's written all these amazing WebAssembly by hand, but normally you'll use something like Rust and compile down to WebAssembly. Now, you'll see a lot of blogs or people on the internet saying, yeah, you can use any language to target WebAssembly. As it stands, that's not quite accurate because, and it has largely been to do with garbage collection. So if you know a little bit about it, Rust isn't garbage collected, and that's one of the reasons it works really well with WebAssembly. Now, languages like Go and so on do require a garbage collector. So to date, to compile to WebAssembly, they've had to they basically had to write the garbage collector into the bytecode, if you like. But now I believe there is actually a lot of work going on at the minute for an actual WebAssembly garbage collector, and that I think will be a big moment when a lot of new languages are able to efficiently use WebAssembly.
It's really a good point. I've seen the same thing with the GraalVM in the Java world, right? Which is, I tell people it's like Go but Java, right? Where basically the runtime is all built into the executable, and it's cross-platform, very similar. But yeah, there's the garbage collector that's part of it as well. And so yeah, it's nice. And so as this platform continues to grow, those other strategies, well, everybody learns from everybody too, right? So these other strategies evolve, and then the industry, just grows because of it. I like the idea of a polyglot platform. I was going to say machine, and to some extent it is, right? Because it becomes something then that the industry can focus on and make sure that my XYZ, my laptop, my Kubernetes cluster, my Lambdas all run this really, really well. And I like to see, look for some consolidation there.
One interesting, from during one of the talks in KubeCon, I think there was one question. There are a lot of questions from the audience. One question was, hey, is it the way it was described about WebAssembly? Like, hey, is it going to replace JavaScript? Looks pretty much on the same line. So there's where I guess the speaker mentioned that, hey, WebAssembly will kind of allow communication between the JavaScript and the Wasm modules to add higher performance and easier access to the browser's API. So yeah, there were some interesting talks during KubeCon. Yeah, and I'm as well very interested to learn more on this current trend.
I'm getting more and more envious that I missed the last KubeCon. So much good information.
All right, and speaking of that, our next topic is dominating the headlines. So even my family members know about this, supply chain security. So you seem like organizations like Brian just is heading up the OpenSSF. And so, we've seen White House put out a report, cloud security is top of mind, but everybody's talking about supply chain security. Adrian, I know you wrote about that as well. So maybe if you want to just kick it off. So for people coming in, what is all this supply chain security stuff? But if you had to boil it down, what are the things that companies should keep in mind today?
Yeah, that's a great question. The problem is with supply chain security, it's a really big term, right? When we think about supply chain security, you're really talking about, well, how does your software get from like developer's laptop into production? And so, you could make the argument that basically any security problem is a supply chain security problem. But to sort of narrow it down a bit, we're really thinking about, I guess, the transit points. So making sure, you start off that you're sure, like your developers that are coding, you're sure that it's their code that's going into build control. You're sure build control is secure. And you're sure the way it gets from the build control to testing or staging or whatever is also secure. And you can get, there's a great site called salsa.dev, so slsa.dev. And basically on that site, they walk through these different levels of supply chain security you can try to aim for. And the top levels, pretty hard to get to. You're going to be talking about like hardware security modules and 2 people checking every change and things like that. What I would say though, 2 or 3 KubeCons back in the EU, I gave a talk on, I think I called it Establishing Image Provenance in Kubernetes. And it was effectively about supply chain security. And that's the way I think about it. Like if you're given like an image running in production, how sure are you of where that image came from, or the container image came from, and can you prove it is what you think it is, sort of thing. And yeah, one thing I would say is to make it a lot easier, and one thing that's made a big improvements in like the last year is in terms of image signing. So there's a project at the minute called Cosign, and there's also a project from the CNCF called Notary. And both of these projects are SigStore, and Cosign's part of SigStore. Both of these projects allow you to add signing to your images. And Cosign actually, there's GitHub Actions have support for Cosign now. So that's one way you can add a whole bunch of security to your images today.
Well, I think, I've done this a couple of times at financial institutions, right, where there's a lot of regulation in place already. And so to some extent, there's a leg up there, maybe because they have so many regulations that they've had to follow. The biggest challenge is the seeming contradiction or conflict between a true CI/CD pipeline and the security stuff. You make a point in your blog about separating responsibilities in terms of each stage of the pipeline. It's critical. I mean, you have to do it for healthcare and financial institutions anyway, because you're going to be audited about it. But at the same time, you don't want to take 3 days to deploy your software because you've got so many audit controls in place. So it becomes a balancing act that I've seen. So not just simply a matter of the artifacts, and working with organizations and saying, if you're, I've mentioned him in Java Guy, said don't pull anything off the internet, right? Make sure you're mirroring everything, you're scanning it all, and all that kind of stuff in terms of that stuff. But at the same time, don't introduce so many steps in terms of manual intervention that you've lost the nimbleness of the organization in order to get your software out quickly. In order to maintain competitiveness. It's a balancing act once again, and it's something that has to be done deliberately and gradually as you go through the process. But I agree with it. It's a big challenge, and it's one. There's often a lot of steps that are skipped, if you will, that something malicious can get introduced, and it's just in this day and age, we all know everything gets hacked. It's just, if it's not now, is eventually, and so you've got to be able to at least provide the auditability to say, okay, this is where this happened, and how we're going to recover from it.
I think that's a great point about balancing act as well. And one thing I'd say is there's a real tension between wanting to keep things up to date. So if like you're dependent on a library or whatever, you want to be getting security updates as quickly as possible. But you also need to make sure everything's tested, or you run into problems like there's the Faker.js thing, like at the start of the year, and that was crazy. Like somebody updated it, he was the maintainer of the project, and he updated it and basically broke it because he was tired of what he felt was people taking advantage of his open source work. And it broke, a lot of people. I think including, was it the AWS CLI? Maybe I shouldn't say that in case I got it wrong, but I think it was something like that, like Boto or something. So yeah, it's a real tension at various parts of the pipeline about, moving fast and getting updates and making sure everything is secure.
Yeah, there's where I think injecting security into your CI/CD pipeline as well kind of is becoming critical. It's just not like pushing code, and you don't want to keep security till the very end before you are deploying code to production. You need to do it as part of your pipeline. Shifting left security strategies kind of getting a lot of traction. I would say the zero trust security model as well. Like, hey, you don't want to blindly trust everything within the security parameter, right? And you want to authenticate and kind of authorize every user application which are trying to access your network. So a lot of security principles, I guess, are becoming very critical when it comes to the zero trust model, multi-factor authentication, say least privilege access, or firewall management, or identity access management. Like for every enterprise, they need to have a very firm strategy from a security perspective.
That's so true. And I was doing a report not too long ago, and when I looked, there has been a 600% increase in cybercrime since the beginning of the pandemic. So again, Ray said it well, like eventually something's going to happen. That doesn't mean that, you're not bad. These cybersecurity people and hackers, they're working just as hard as the ethical hackers are and people who are trying to plug those holes up. So it's a continuous battle.
I think that's a really interesting point, because it goes back to this thing like security. Nobody, like, if you do it well, nothing goes wrong, right? And so it's almost like a thankless task. It's very, so that's the reason we're so behind. It's because things weren't going too wrong. You don't get any money for it. It's only when things go wrong people notice.
I agree, and to Tristan's point, one of the things about cybersecurity, or about those issues, is in fact there's a percentage. I don't recall what the number is. Most of it's inside jobs, right? And so the point that Adrian's making in terms of the developer, killing his own product, if you're his own component, most of it comes from the inside. There's plenty of attacks from the outside for sure, but it's the internal malicious folks that are one in, I don't know how many the number is, that you've really got to be watching for, along with the stuff from the outside as well. It's not just an external attack.
So how do you prevent, or how do you protect against that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, part of it boils down to the steps throughout the whole pipeline, right? And what your source code analysis, your container analysis, all of those pieces, keeping up to date on. In this case here, CVEs, and sometimes they come out a little bit late, but at least being aware of them, and having the same diligence with the tooling internally. Once again, tooling that doesn't impede the work, because all these tools can be automated today, but is constantly scanning, your code base. And to your point, well, a couple of folks pairing, a couple of eyes, trusted folks on, eyes on the software as well. So it's a lot of process. And it can be done, but it's got to be done in such a way that it fits right in with the regular flow. And the planning, once again, is the tough part.
Awesome. Amazing discussion. And one thing that we really want to talk about today, since we have Andy on, also Adrian, especially in cloud, there's so much going on with machine learning and AI. And so sometimes it's like companies say, wink, wink, machine learning, or wink, wink, AI, and that type of deal. It's like, what do they really mean beyond some just generic marketing stuff? But since we have Andy on the show today, one of the industry experts for it, also with Adrian, Andy, you want to kick it off? What are some of the machine learning trends that you're seeing? What are you kind of passionate about and excited about this year?
Yeah, sure. So I have kind of four trends. The last one of which I stole from Andrew Ng. So I kind of the first trend I have is ML ops becoming a real thing. So, and I kind of had firsthand experience with this a little while ago. But it's actually, there's you can pick any ML ops platform, and they're all pretty much good. And all the vendors. GCP have Vertex AI, which they launched last year, and AWS have SageMaker. But there's also then really, really good and robust open source platforms like Kubeflow, Metaflow, MLflow, and then also there's great startups in this space like Weights and Biases that actually. So like the whole ML ops is actually a real thing now, and which is great because it makes it really easy for data scientists to actually get their code into production and become more like an ML engineer. I had a sort of a theory a while ago where like data scientists as a role needs to kind of morph into machine learning engineers, and ML ops is kind of making that easy for people. And likewise the other way around as well, where traditional software engineers can also use these tools to actually just use ML just as any other tool or technique that to bring to bear on some solution they want to build. So that's kind of that's like my first major theme, is that like ML ops is now a real thing. And then the second theme was, which we kind of touched on a little bit earlier with the OpenAI discussion around like GitHub Copilot, all that stuff, is APIs and transfer learning kind of going mainstream. So these big, massive models that cost millions to train, that only the likes of Google or OpenAI can train, but actually now these are becoming available to the masses through APIs that you can sign up for, and sort of transfer learning out of the box. So you can kind of bring your own sort of starter data set, and it can kind of tweak, do a little bit of transfer learning, which will still get you the best of, all the hard work is done, the model is already trained, but you can kind of transfer learning to tune it to your specific context or your specific domain. And so we're starting to see a lot of services and solutions kind of coming out around that space, where packaging up the actual ML into just API endpoints that you can just use as a developer. And then my third one is ML at the edge kind of continues to grow and grow. Especially there's the Tiny ML community and Tiny ML movement there's a lot of momentum there. Like a lot of the big players are actually really supportive of that community, and it's a great community that seems to be kind of growing and from strength to strength. So that's kind of, I think, a longer term trend that's just going to keep on kind of growing, but it seems to really be making progress. And then my last one, which is the trend that I stole from Andrew Ng, is the data-centric approach to ML AI, which was sort of, it wasn't until when he kind of came out with this during the year, which is a more approach around, like, Google originally had this picture, a few years ago about all the things it goes to take to getting the ML into production, and the ML is just a tiny little black box at the middle of it. But there's all the other parts around, like the serving platform, the monitoring, the data pre-processing, the design and architecture. So there's all these other things that go around it. And I think one of the main points of Andrew Ng's data-centric approach is to actually focus a bit more on the data that you're feeding into the ML. and focus on the architecting of the actual formulation of the problem, as opposed to going straight to focus on the sexy ML algorithm and use the biggest, fanciest deep learning algorithm you can find. It's more of a kind of from first principles approach, where we actually just start with the data as well and take a sort of a step back. So they're kind of the four main trends that I think I see.
Yeah, I think we talked about cyber security. So I feel like the AI ML algorithms, they are very useful in that area as well, wherein they can look at the network traffic, they can recognize the patterns, right? Which kind of is very cumbersome for humans to do. Predictive analysis is something which is all over now. Like if you're talking about your cloud usage, cost optimization, everything is now, like most of the things are being driven by AI. Also, I'm kind of very intrigued by one very popular term these days called metaverse, right? Which is just a virtual world where users can just go into an immersive experience. I feel like AI, ML are key technologies that will drive metaverse in coming days as well.
I do think and Andy mentioned this to some extent, is how, how do you get, once the model is done, how do you get it embedded within an application, right? Sometimes you can run the stuff independently, and that's great too. But if I want to assist my customers in making decisions based on data, what type of platform or what type of architecture do I need that I can, take the hard work that's been done, encapsulate it and boil it down to embedding it within my application and allowing a customer of mine to make educated and informed decisions based on their data or industry data. So I think that's a big aspect of it too, is getting it into the hands of just folks that don't even know the power of what's behind that's going on there.
Yeah, and I think there's some really good progress there in that, like, it's really, really easy now to get your model into an endpoint. So if you want to deploy your model as a service, it's almost like one click. I had this recently in BigQuery, where I had all the data in BigQuery, and I wanted to build a model for click-throughs on alerts, and within a couple of clicks, I had this endpoint that I could now give to our backend engineers, which would have been so much more work previously. And then the other side, though, which is kind of specific to some of the stuff we do at Netdata, is putting the model down to the edge as much as possible as well, so we don't have to have this network traffic and these cloud traffic endpoints. And in that regard, there's also like lots of open standards as well now, where we could train the model in the cloud, and then Onyx runtime, you have an Onyx runtime for any particular language you could imagine. So there's, so we could do our training could happen in the cloud. If we, you could do your fancy training in Python in the cloud and just let it work. But then actually you could deploy that model really easily into a super efficient runtime that can be on, C, C++, whatever your language of choice is. There's going to be a kind of a runtime for you. So I think it's kind of getting easier to put cloud services, but it's also getting easier to put at the edge as well. So it's more a case of the challenge then is how you architect and think about, well, what makes sense to run where, and how do you maintain it, and how do you kind of monitor it once it's live as well.
All right, that's great. Adrian, anything you want to add? I know you're kind of passionate on this as well.
To be fair, these people know much more than me. I was just looking at it from a sort of the curious side of like where things are going with like Copilot, and trying to look into, well, how far will it go with like AI helpers? And that's where I see it going, to be honest. It's like a lot of tools like help us or help the humans do better jobs, as opposed to replacing the human in most cases. But we'll wait and see if that's accurate.
Yeah, I have this idea in my head of a GPT-driven recommendation engine in Netdata. So after you've clicked one or two charts, it should be able to predict the next chart. And so this whole thing could be converted into like an NLP problem. And I think a lot of a lot of things are starting to do that now, where you can kind of turn the NLP into anything basically, and almost like a recommendation engine, just as long as you prompt it the right way, that happens. So yeah, I would love to kind of play around with stuff like that at some stage.
All right, that's amazing. And so we'll do one quick topic and turn it over to the Q&A. So I'd be remiss. We've got Tristan here. Tristan, you are out there on the front lines. You know what's going on in the cloud, trends, things like that. Looking at outside of 2022 and beyond, what are some of the trends that are really exciting for you? Or just maybe even if there's some more from this year. I mean, you've got such a unique perspective as an expert, but also being on the front lines. So what are some of those future trends that excite you? And is there anything else this year that we missed that also excites you?
Just really quickly, just to go through some of these trends that I'm always looking at, having my eyes on. In terms of cloud, gaming has been one of the things that have been pushing it on the forefront. Specifically, Google Stadia, Amazon, Luna, where they're just all cloud, just going all in using that compute power. Fintech, like I was talking about earlier, that's a big thing. There's specifically with IBM, Banco Sabadell, which was a bank in Mexico, became one of the first mobile bankings to go 100% at that time. They were able to join with the FinTech Association of Mexico. So FinTech continues to move the ball forward in that. Continuation of hybrid cloud. We're blurring the line between public and private clouds in terms of like data centers and things of that nature. AI, which we spoke about earlier, cloud computing for the algorithms, generative machine learnings and things of that nature. Also serverless is going to be another big thing. When we were talking about Wasm earlier, it kind of reminded me of, the serverless community. So function as a service, that's a big thing. So those are just a couple of trends that I've been thinking about, that I've been seeing at work and just in my personal research of what those trends are that seem to be on the forefront.
Excellent. Anybody else have some future trends that they also want to speak to? Or are we just ready to jump into the Q&A?
I just like to go ahead, Rick.
Okay, so just to kind of mention something that Tristan said, he mentioned the hybrid aspect. I think any business that thinks they're going to do an all-in-one, thing is probably a little bit misguided, because there's going to be multiple service providers for your entire organization. And as much as you'd like to use one, even if part of it's hybrid and local, be expected to have a mix of service providers in your cloud strategy.
Yeah, and I was thinking of adding the emergence of service mesh at scale. Like there are a lot of enterprises who are in the cloud native space who are implementing service mesh to run like hundreds and hundreds of microservices at scale. So understanding the complexity of those architectures and how companies are like resolving the challenges is very interesting as well. Something to look forward to here.
Excellent. All right. So for now, we've covered a lot of topics today. We had Tristan, Andy, Adrian, Samir, and Ray, two of the most amazing people in this space that are talking about it, blogging about it, out at trade shows. We had them right here today. So super exciting to have you all on the Q&A. Let's get started. So we've got one of our very own community members asking, I'll put it up on the screen, Technique ask. So, hey, you're all probably in some amazing jobs positions now, but what studies did you do to get to your current position for where you're working today?
Yeah, I'll go. I did a pretty standard, I don't know, I suspect a lot of us did the same. It's just did computer science at university. I did do quite an interesting course afterwards, although I don't suppose it really helped me in my career. Well, actually it did in a way. I did high performance computing at the University of Edinburgh, and I actually met Jamie Dobson there, who's the CEO of Container Solutions. And I actually also worked for the Edinburgh Parallel Computing Centre, which was part of the University of Edinburgh, for a few years afterwards. So that's kind of how I got into things. But mainly, the reason I got into computing was just because of curiosity. And I would like to think that even if I hadn't gone to uni, there'd still be the opportunity to like, do boot camps and get a foot in the door that way.
I would agree with that. I find that computer science usually gives you a footing to kind of conceptualize and understand things. But the most important thing that I would say, especially in 2022, is the learning never stops. So you get that base ground, and just like in tech, every 6 months there's a new this, there's a new that. You mentioned service mesh and Istio and things like that. You always have to keep learning. And luckily, there's a lot of online courses. You can reach out to people and things of that nature. So get that core understanding and just keep building upon that.
Yeah,
That's a
I would
good
say
point.
the same. I did.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like I have a bachelor's in computer science, and but yeah, there's so much of technology coming up, so you can invest in certifications. There are a lot of free resources. Being part of the community, the open source community as well, is key. Like in Twitter, if you follow some of the popular folks around open source, CNCF is great. And then just find out the nearby meetups which you have in your local place, wherever you are, and be part of those meetups. There's a lot of things to learn there.
Yeah, if I just chime in quickly. So a couple of things. When folks ask me about, they're looking at different schools to get a degree, I do ask them and suggest that they really study the curriculum and make sure it's theoretical, because the hands-on stuff, it just changes too much. You're going to learn this language, you're not going to use, you're not going to use those languages, right? Learn the theory behind, compilers, behind the way stuff works, and then your career will go on for a long time. I'm going to date myself a bit here. So I started coding in 1976, and I love it as much as I did back then. And so you're constantly learning, but I also attribute it to the fact that when I went to school, computer science programs were brand spanking new. And but the ones that taught theory are the ones that I found, in which I did. It keeps me going. It's easy for me to pick up things, so I understand the theory behind it.
I think I might out myself as the imposter among us. I don't have computer science background. I did economics, politics, and quantitative finance. So I'm an imposter when it comes to the software engineering of it all.
I love that point too, because I have a lot of friends that didn't even finish college or high school, and they've made it to some really cool positions. So I love that point.
Yeah, that's a great story. How did you oh, sorry, I think we're going to move on to the question. I was going to ask Andy, how did you make the jump into like more tech stuff?
Yeah, I had been kind of a frustrated data scientist for a good few years, where it was very hard to actually get the insights or the machine learning into production. And I had a few probably 3 or 4 jobs in a row where it was just getting harder and harder to actually have an impact on the organization, because I could only go so far with sort of my Python skills to like take some data and show, like maybe make a proof of concept, but actually to get the proof of concept into production is just so much more effort and so much more work. And so I started trying to kind of transition myself away from a data scientist to be more of a machine learning engineer, which I still feel a little bit like I'm not fully there yet, but it's kind of just by actively trying to get more exposed, and the tools helped as well. So I as in the last 5 years or so, the tools have made it a lot easier as well. So you can kind of get started fairly easy now, just because a lot of the problems have already been solved, which they wouldn't have been maybe 10 years ago. So it's kind of helped that it's been easier to make that transition as well. But primarily just kind of also focusing on like your own portfolio, build up your own sort of portfolio of example projects, and that you can then use to show like, hey, I'm not just a data scientist who is going to write notebooks all day and make pretty reports. I can actually try and build stuff, you know. So that's one thing I'd suggest as well.
Excellent. And then up next, we've got a question from Costas. He says, great discussion, guys. What is your opinion about the rise of the distributed cloud, cloudifying of the edge, etc.?
Yeah, I'll go. Somebody else is going to start. I think that's I think that's a big movement at the minute. I'd be interested to see what everybody else thinks. And I think that's where we're going to see a big fight, basically, because you have companies like Amazon that want to control the whole sort of stack, if you like, and then you have companies like Cloudflare and Fastly and so on that I think are effectively doing what I'm not entirely sure about what's meant by distributed cloud. I'm taking it to mean sort of, you know, things like Cloudflare and Fastly that are doing things where they're traditionally CDN. So they've got all these data centers that are close to the user. And now they're offering stuff like functions as a service and more services that can potentially be a lot faster, you know, make it up a lot faster for users across the world. And of course, I'm not entirely sure, you know, Amazon aren't going to take this lying down. They're going to also, I mean, we also already have Amazon CDNs and so on. So it's going to be an interesting battle there, I think.
Excellent. Anybody else want to take that one?
Yeah, I've seen a few use cases while attending some of the meetups. A lot of my community members, they did mention about their enterprises kind of trying to evaluate multi-cloud kind of setup, right? There are a lot of complexities around that, first of all. But there are some advantages wherein if you don't want to be tied up to a particular cloud provider and you want to have more flexibility when it comes to kind of your business and application requirements, you can go that route, distributed cloud, right? And as well, I've seen one pattern, whereas when it comes to data specifically, like if you have some very different use cases around your data platform, and you can kind of leverage some other third party, some other cloud, which might be a step ahead than what you have in your own public cloud.
Excellent. And then up next, we've got a question from Satya Deep, who asks, should we have cloud native applications to be built in with advanced monitoring capability in addition to security?
Short answer is yes. And it's deliberate, right, in terms of our software architecture. The long answer is how. But it has to tie all the way up into what's run in your runtime environment, and all the pieces have to work together. One of the things that's nice about something like Prometheus, for example, is that it's a pull technology, and so as long as you're offering up the information, you can leverage things like Prometheus to pull. So yes, it's got to be in there, and it's got to be deliberate, and you have to have the end goal in mind, and that is, how am I going to get this information and review this information?
Yeah, and I kind of touched around this topic a few minutes back, wherein I was saying that we need to have some standardization around these monitoring, troubleshooting, the tooling aspect as well. Like if you have hundreds of services running in your company, you don't want all your development teams to kind of build their own monitoring tooling around their services. These tooling needs to be standardized. Like you have Prometheus, Grafana, right? And there are a lot of standard tools which you can use if you are in the cloud native space and using Kubernetes for your container orchestration purpose.
All right, we are at the top of the hour. We had a lot of amazing questions. I know other people are probably running to the next stand-up or their 50th meeting of the day. So wherever you are, we definitely thank you for your time. We're also going to do an after party. Hey, this is season 1 of the Netdata Troubleshooting Show, so why not, right? So we're going to be doing an after party on Netdata Discord run by our very own Miguel. So just kind of going to close up our discussion here today, our season 1 of the Netdata Troubleshooting Show. Absolutely amazing guest that we had on today. So thanks for everyone for being on and sharing your insight, expertise, getting in people from the front line. Hope this was amazing for you and for everybody that's going to be watching, that was watching, and then everybody that will be watching. So we know there's going to be tons of people out there that are going to be watching this over the coming days and weeks ahead. Hopefully you got a lot of stuff out of that. And I should also note, we are going to be doing some Netdata meetups. As Samir said, meetups are so critical to learning. So if you ever have any topics or ideas, let us know. And I did mention, if you need some cool Netdata swag, stickers, that sort of stuff, we've got a cool stuff going on there. Just drop me an email. I'm happy to do that. Us on the community team are always around too. So if you have any questions, you can book time with us. I'm happy to talk and that sort of thing. And then for the panel, like, any final thoughts today, anything else you want to leave people with, a quote, word of wisdom, any sort of final things that you want to say with our amazing community and audience?
I'd say there's a lot of help in the community. And so reach out to the community when you have questions. There's a lot of good people there that can help you.
I don't have anything, but my dog's woken up and he wants to say hi.
What's your dog's name?
He's Dudley. He's very old. He's an old man, 16.
Excellent. And then Andy, we'll have Andy on next month as well. So we've got an exciting session that's going to be coming up with Andy. A lot of exciting stuff here. Samir, Tristan, Adrian, Ray, it was great to have you here. If any of y'all still have time and want to skip your next meetup, y'all join us in our after party on Discord. If you've got the time, we'd love to have you, each one of you on there as well. So we've got some amazing stuff going on there. Definitely understand if people have meetings, that sort of thing. And just really just super excited to get season 1 going here with the Netdata Troubleshooting Show. Lots of excitement, things like that. We put into the chat a lot of where you can find everybody, like on Twitter, the amazing blog post that Adrian did. If you happen to miss any of that stuff, feel free to reach out. We'll make sure that we get you connected. There's just so much exciting stuff going on in the space. But wow, just amazing to have some of the best and brightest right here to boil it all down, because it feels like every day I'm, 24 hours later, it's like, wow, what's happening next? And somebody's got to fill us in and all that type of stuff. But anyway, this is Blake on the Netdata team, going to sign us out. Tristan, Andy, Samir, Adrian, and Ray, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Blake.
Cheers.
And a link to Discord. See you there for, if you've got time, shift left to Netdata.